My Hebrew brothers and sisters, scattered all over the world, the 12 tribes of Israel, welcome back. This is your Moreh Yeshua ben Uriah Israel. And we are just delighted for the opportunity to share with you. And let me take this time to thank you. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing to this channel, and we ask that you'll continue to do that. Get your friends and your family members and also encourage them to do that. Encourage them to like and subscribe to these channels as we move towards our goal. Remember, we want to go live. We can accommodate only 75 people right now, at least 70 to 75 people. If we go live, but there would be a lot of people, many who would want to come in and would not be able to because we don't have enough room. We would not have enough room for that. So once we get over 1,000 subscription, we can get as many people in the room as possible. Today we want to talk about vessels of honor. Vessels of honor. You know, as Hebrew Israelite people, we are scattered all over the globe. We are everywhere. We are in the U.S., all 52 states. We are in Europe, all the countries of Europe. You're going to find us scattered there. In Asia, in Africa, in the Caribbean, South America, we're everywhere. And you see, why we're there, remember in the previous session I mentioned the fact that Yahuwah placed us there. He placed us there for a specific reason, so that we can be light, shining in dark places, so the Gentiles can see and come to the acknowledgement that Yahuwah is our Almighty. But let me say this, we cannot be vessels of honor for Yahuwah if we are not right spiritually, morally. We have to be right spiritually and morally. We have to be right. We have to be right socially too. So how to be vessels of honor? And this is a passage in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 19 through 22. And I'm going to read some of it from the translation that is called the Scripture. Remember, I mentioned that the Scripture holds that it is the closest to the Hebrew language. But in verse 19 it said, however, the solid foundation of Elohim stands firm, having this seal. Yahuwah knows those who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Messiah turn away from unrighteousness. But in a large house, there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some unto value and some unto no value. If then anyone cleanses himself from these matters, he shall be vessel unto value, having been set apart of a good use to the master, and having been prepared for every good work. Flee, this is what it said here in verse 22, it said, and flee from the lust of youth, but pursue righteousness, belief, love, peace, with those calling and the master out of a clean heart. Now, the King James Version, I'm going to read a little different. He talks about fleeing youthful lusts. And he talks about vessels unto honor and vessels unto dishonor. Fit for the masters, or meet for the master's use. Here in this passage, the Apostle Paul, he is sending and giving Timothy, his son in the ministry, his spiritual son. There's something about this passage here in the New Testament. There's something about this passage is the fact that the writer of the book, of the letter, he was the one that sent his letters out. He was a Hebrew Israelite. I was sure, and because sometimes he's writing to Gentiles too. But here, his son in the ministry was also another Hebrew Israelite, Timothy. And he's asking to keep reminding the believers to avoid quarreling. In verse 14, for 2 Timothy chapter 2. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 14. He's telling them to remind them. Reminding the believers to avoid quarreling and about words, and these are of no value and will ruin those who listen. And so he went on to talk to him. He exhorted Timothy, the young minister, to study YAHUAH'S word to be approved. And you remember, this is a favorite verse. It study to show thyself approved unto. In the King James Version, God was for YAHUAH. A workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So here, there are three important principles that we want to pull from this passage that is good for us as Hebrew Israelites scattered all over the place. These important principles will enable us to be vessels of honor in our daily walk with YAHUAH. And the first, how important are these principles? How important? These principles are important because they help us to clarify our true identity. One of the biggest problems is when people asking, how do you know? How do you know that you are a Hebrew? How do you know you're an Israelite? How do you know you belong to YAHUAH? Well, these principles that we see here are going to help us. They're going to help us. They are important because they're going to help us to clarify our true security. Not only the true identity, the true security, and the believer's vessel, the essential purity that, if you remember, he said that we are to cleanse ourselves from these. Anything that is unrighteous, we are to cleanse ourselves. So here he said, let us think of the Hebrew Israelite. The Hebrew Israelite and his or her true security. Nevertheless, listen what he said. In the King James Version, he said, God's solid foundation stand firm, sealed with this inscription. It's solid, it's firm, it's unyielding. It's a foundation because It has base. It has establishment. It's a divine institution. It's the groundwork, the divine organization. It stands. It's firm, divinely placed. It's situated. It's positioned. It's rested. It's firm. It's compacted, it's rigid, it's solid, it's unyielding, it's firm. Our security, our true security in Yahuwah. We don't have to go and run around and acting like, He have us this moment and the next moment He doesn't have us. If we belong to Him, if we come to Him, if we open ourselves to Him, and we live according to His word. As a matter of fact, He says He seals us until the day of promise. That's what His word tells us. But here, the believers and our true identity, not only that we are secure, but our true identity said, first of all, we have a seal of possession. This is what He said. In verse 21, verse 21, verse 219b rather. I'm sorry. This is what He said here. Yeshua, because you talk about masters here. Master mean you're referring to Yeshua. He knows those who are His. A lot of people run around and say, okay. So, how do you know that? He knows. We can't fool Him. In Revelation, it talks about those who say they are Jews and they are not. They are the synagogue of Satan. But in chapter 2, verse 21, 2 Timothy 2, verse 19, we don't get to 21 yet, but verse 19b, He said, Yahuwah knows those, Yeshua, He knows those who are His. So there we see is a seal of possession. But in the C part of that verse, there is a seal of profession. And in verse 19c, He said, everyone who confesses the name of Yeshua, anyone who confesses the name of Yahuwah, we must turn away from wickedness. We must turn away from wickedness. It's important. But not only that we're seeing our true security, the Hebrew Israelites' true security, or the Hebrew Israelite true identity, but I want you to notice in verse 20, it talks about the Hebrew Israelites' true or essential purity. Essential purity. It said, in a large house, there are articles not only of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. Some of them for the noble are valuable, good value, for noble purposes, and some for ignoble or of no value. But listen what He said. In verse 21, He said, if a man cleanses himself from the latter or from these, He said, he will be an instrument for noble purposes, made holy, useful for the master's use, prepared unto every good work. Let me say this, my brothers and my sisters. We have to live according to his word. We have to live according to his word. Remember our identity, our security, our essential purity. We have to live pure and holy to him. We're going to ask you to walk with the King and be a blessing to others. Shalom.